Working Cows Podcast, episode 344. This episode is brought to you by Farming Without the Bank.
Welcome to the podcast that gives producers a platform to discuss and share paradigm-challenging practices. Practices that have increased the effectiveness of their operation and the joy that their families have received from this lifestyle.
Howdy, everybody. It's Clay Conry, host of the Working Cows Podcast, recorded exclusively in the Understanding Ag Studios. And this episode is brought to you by Farming Without the Bank. None of you are farming like you did 100 years ago. Why are you financing it like you did 100 years ago? The biggest part of your operation is the money that runs through your hands, and you let someone else control that. The bank gets the final say in what you get money for and when you pay it back. For many, this is a great relationship, until it's not. Farming Without the Bank shows you how you can take back control of your money so that you can make the bank plan B instead of plan A. This is done by you creating your own banking system you own and control. To learn more, tune into the Farming Without the Bank podcast and go to farmingwithoutthebank.com to get the book. Once you've read the book, Mary Jo will meet with you one-on-one and help you determine where and how to get started. She'll most likely also touch base on some estate transition ideas, financing ideas, business growth or startup ideas, and many other things she has experience with from helping thousands of farmers and ranchers like you. So go to farmingwithoutthebank.com to get the book today and subscribe to the Farming Without the Bank podcast. Very excited to be joined today by Jeremy Engh. Jeremy is on the United States board of the Red Devon Association, and we're going to talk to him today about the deep history of the Red Devon breed. We're also going to talk to him about the 2024 World Red Devon Congress Tour. This year marks 400 years since the arrival of the Red Devon breed in America to the Plymouth colony. And so we're going to talk to him about just kind of some of the significance of that, but then also about this tour that they're taking, starting in Florida, working its way up the East Coast and into Ohio and New York, and then finishing at the Plymouth colony, the Plymouth Patuxent Colony Living Museum there, and their banquet that evening. So pretty amazing opportunity. So check out the show notes page for today, workingcows.net/344 if you're interested in being a part of that. I know it looks like a great opportunity even to take the kids along and just get some living history and see some of that. So would highly encourage you to check out the show notes page for today. And we'll talk to Jeremy about that and more. So Jeremy, thanks for joining me today on the Working Cows podcast.
Thanks for having me, Clay.
Yeah, I really appreciate the opportunity. Steve, one of your board members, reached out to me and told me a little bit about what you guys got going on, and excited about that. And then we had the chance to meet this afternoon and talk a little bit about the Devon breed itself and some of the events you guys have coming up. But that's kind of where I'd like to start, is on the Devon breed itself. And I think it's always fascinating to me to recognize the deep history of how we got where we're at now in the American livestock enterprise. And so I'd like to talk a little bit about the Devon breed itself and how it got to America and some of the history that you're aware of prior to its arrival in America. So if you want to treat it chronologically and start at the beginning of what you know, that'd be great, or jump in at the high point and we can flesh it out in both directions from there. Either way is fine.
Sure, absolutely. And really appreciate the opportunity to tell our story on your stage and share what we're so excited about with your viewers or your listeners rather. Sorry, here on the Zoom. But the Devon breed is typically known as the oldest breed of record, meaning we have traceable pedigrees that go back to England and to the 1400s. So the Devon cattle are typically regarded as Boss Long and Friends, more closely related, of course, to the Boss Taurus breeds of England, and came to England via the tin trade from the Romans but really formed as a breed in southern England and in Devon, and played a role there in the development of Angus and Hereford breeds, is typically believed as well. In 1623, the first consignment of European cattle came to the Plymouth colony on a ship called Charity. There's some argument 1623, 24 based on calendars and such, but that's what we're celebrating. And there were other breeds that were brought to this country before the Devon cattle, but the Devon cattle, we feel like we're the birth of the U.S. beef and dairy industries. They played a role. They weren't feral cattle, right? They were cattle that came from Europe. Europe started breeding cattle for carcass for meat quality 100 years before anybody else. They were the richest culture in the world at that point. And when they selected the Devons to come to the U.S., I think it was based more on longevity, adaptability, docility, and all these things. Obviously, the cattle had to survive a ship ride across the ocean and be swum ashore, adapt to new soils, new grasses, new people management, etc. And Devons weren't just used to settle the U.S. They were also sent to South America and Australia and New Zealand, and on and on. And in 1623, the first consignment, and that was followed with subsequent deliveries of Devon cattle. Devon beef was used. The first packing company that did processed beef in the U.S. was Devon beef. Now, more recently in our history, you go back to the 1950s, and breeders had been selecting, a group of breeders up in New England had been selecting for butterfat and milk quantity and quality, basically. John Hall would be the man to talk to, but there were certain requirements as to the milk production of the cows to be entered into the Milking Devon registry. And that registry broke off. It wasn't a split, if you will, but just a formation of a new registry, because the cattle were being selected obviously for milk and not for beef traits. The beef Devon of today is typically a polled animal, but not necessarily. And in this country is used basically for grass farming. However, in Australia, they're still typically grown for the feedlot. And in Brazil, I would say it's more for meat quality than anything right now that they're most highly touted for. So incredibly diverse breed, but the records have been maintained. If you go back in history, George Washington had Devon cattle. We still, until recently, were running cattle at Stratford Hall, the home of Robert E. Lee and his family, which was the most prominent family in the eastern U.S. until Washington became president. King Charles, formerly Prince Charles, had Devons, has Judge Devons, Henry Ford. The list goes on, and certainly Devons have been kept for like Arabian horses to some degree. In England, they're still more that premier breed, but Devons back in history were known as the butcher's breed. They were known as the breed designed by centuries of grass farming. So they had a natural ability to work on grass, and have been selected mainly for that the last 20 years here in the U.S. And before that, and you and I discussed it a little bit earlier, there was only a handful of breeders, my father, Jerry Engh, being one of them, that were really just doing conservation breeding. It was a heritage breed that was in low numbers. And he loved the breed. He has shown them as a boy and had a loyalty to the breed. And so they kept the animals as they were, if you will. They didn't chase 1,600-pound cows, frame score 6 and 7 animals. They left the breed as it was. So the reality, and listen to you before, right? There's great animals in all breeds, and all breeds were designed to work on grass initially. It's how much men have changed them and how much influence we've had. And I think the Devon breed is less changed than the other breeds. And the dairy Devon probably even more so than the beef Devon. It's a more accurate reflection of what the animals looked like 400 years ago that came over.
Yeah, very interesting. So going way back, you said it was part of the tin trade, like TIN mining, right? And that would have been the draft side of the breed, or the emphasizing the draft traits of the breed. Is that the right way to say it?
Yeah, exactly. And the Devon was the primary draft animal in westward expansion. And I'd have to do a little more research to get my dates right, but it was primarily the Devon, and then there was a shift to shorthorn oxen. But the Devons were known for being the tougher, more resilient animal, but they couldn't cover as many miles in a day, something to that degree.
Sure.
But prominent in westward expansion, prominent, contributing. There's still dairy Devons in production today. We're going to visit on our World Devon Congress tour as we work up to our celebration in Plymouth. A dairy Devon operation. I still have some dairy Devons that we breed in with our beef Devons. It adds those maternal traits, calving ease and better milk and udder structure, and stay with your calf when it's born, these sort of things that tend to get lost when you chase meat and muscle for too many generations.
That's interesting, and we'll get to that in a later portion of this conversation. But yeah, so and it makes sense, right? This breed that is good for milk, good for meat, good as a draft animal would be part of the westward expansion, because they were literally carving a living out of the land in those days, and they wouldn't have been able to take everything or 3 different animals, or even if they could, they'd rather take one animal that could do all 3 things, and then you just see the utility of those animals and their ability to do those 3 things, and it makes a perfect animal for that early pioneer type of critter that they needed to do what they had to do.
Absolutely. I bought a herd of dairy Devons probably 15 years ago now that had been hand milked up in New Hampshire, and I sold them off one at a time to homesteaders, people that want a family cow that they can milk and feed their family, but they bred it back to a polled beef Devon to add meat and muscle to that calf. And, you get enough milk out of that cow if fed properly to feed your family and raise the calf. And so just what you said, providing both meat and milk to the family obviously requires a level of management. And that's not typically something that's 100% grass fed, but it could be, right?
Mm-hmm. So do you have a sense of the ebb and flow of the popularity of the Devon breed from 1623 to now? Do you have some kind of sense of that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was slow but steady growth, and I would say was of course now we've got a lot more breeds than we did back then, and I won't throw stones, but I go online and people are comparing Devons to a breed that only has existed for 10 or 15 years. And when you talk about genetic impact on heterosis, which is the real cattle industry, beef industry in this country, right, is crossbred animals. Well, you get more genetic punch with a purer strain of genetics. And anyway, that's another subject for another day. But if you go back far enough, right, there was only a dozen real breeds that were in this country, and Devon did as well as any of them. It wasn't until the feedlot craze that things changed. And ironically, right around 1980, a handful of the biggest breeders in the country, Devon Acres was the largest one, and they signed a contract and crossbred everything to Brahma cattle. And the herd disappeared. The other big herds, there were some divorces, there were some deaths, but herds just were liquidated, not to any real fault of the breed. When they were looking at developing a lot of different breeds, Santa Gertrudis, Beefmaster. Of course, we have the South Devon today, which goes back to a Devon and they think a Guernsey cross 50 generations ago. But what they always ran into, and more recently with the South Pole, Teddy Gentry was looking at the Devon as a cross in there, and there just wasn't a big enough pool of genetics, and that's why they went away from the breed. But if you look back at the performance data that's out there, and you've got to go back to the 70s and 80s to get anything that was that the Devons had big enough numbers to participate in, they always did really well. We sent animals, my father, much more than me, we sent animals out to feedlots in the 90s that was the only place you could get carcass data back then. Your local butchers wouldn't get it for you, and you couldn't get an ultrasound tech to come to you. So we would send cattle out there every year, and every year we would the cattle would finish faster than anybody else's. They would grade higher than anybody else's, but we would get no premiums at all because our little 1,100 and 1,200 pound carcasses didn't qualify us for any of the premiums. But it was a wonderful tool for selecting for carcass quality, because even back then, primarily our customers have been people that are selling into a quality-based, they're selling to their neighbors and their community and local restaurants, not taking it to the local stock sale and getting paid per pound of gain and for what color the hide is.
Yeah. So I'm very naive or ignorant of breed associations and what goes into registering cattle and what kind of measurements or statistics they would have necessarily. But do you have a sense of how much how similar the Devon today is to what came in 1623 or even back to the records that started in the 1400s? Is there any sense of how similar these animals are to what they had then?
I think so. I mean, we have pictures. Of course, today we have video and we have lots of different measurements. But before this, we had pictures and weights and measurements. And before that, we had artwork. And, you can certainly say that artwork can be manipulated, but nowadays pictures can probably be manipulated just as easily. And even that, you let me take 100 pictures of a sorry looking bull and I can probably find you one that makes them look halfway decent. Right. So if you look at the artwork and what we have of the time, the modern dairy Devon looks a whole lot more like those animals that came over. But, again, the breed was so adaptable. So yes, westward expansion certainly they played a role in that. But you also had this group that went up to New England that was still making draft animals, but focused solely on, not solely, but focused on milk production. They obviously still needed fertility, conformational correctness, etc. And then, of course, you had breeders that bred for pounds and carcass quality and carcass quantity, and again, the Devon are smaller, but we can create great big Devons. There's Devons in feedlots in Australia as big as, we can create whatever we want. But in my experience, work with nature, not against nature, and be observant and see what works. And so try not to change too much.
Yeah.
But, because we are recording information, I like the bigger the better. If you can produce a calf that finishes on grass in 2 years or less and grades high choice, sure, I'd like you to add another 100 pounds, as long as it doesn't cost me longevity, fertility, etc. And so the beef animal has certainly developed over time as well. We had the same problems as some other breeds. The first polled Devons didn't have any rear end at all, similar to other breeds. And it took 30 years before that changed. Now, the polled Devons are every bit as good as horned Devons out there. And again, there's good animals in all breeds. There's some sorry Devons out there, right? But it as a breed, and I think if you plucked the 10 average Devons out of a lottery and dropped them in the middle of a pasture with 10 of everybody else that owned grass, they would outperform the competitors and from a meat quality standpoint. But again, we'd probably lose the adjusted yearling weight and the hip height competitions.
Yep. And I think that it's so interesting to me, and I don't know that we'll ever crack the nut totally, but it's so interesting to me that it's really hard to change one thing without affecting other things, right? Like you mentioned, you get rid of the horn and you lose the rear end. I've talked to other people who talked about, just actually a couple of episodes ago, talked to a gal who was grass finishing Scottish Highlanders. And she said without horns, they're incredibly intolerant to heat. The horns play a role in helping them be heat tolerant critters. And so it's just all these kinds of things that you really can't change one thing without really affecting everything else. And so I think that a breed that has really attempted to stick to, what the animal is in its natural environment is going to be better. Can you contrast a little bit the milking Devon and the beef Devon and some of the differences from a structural standpoint that really stand out to you?
Sure, absolutely. And I mean, to your point, right? So this is the same breed that this group of individuals selected for dairy purposes and this for beef purposes. Well, the modern dairy Devon takes 3 years to finish. The modern beef Devon takes 2 years to finish. The modern dairy Devon certainly is going to give you more pounds of milk per day and have higher nutritional requirements. I breed everything at a year to calve at 2. Well, if I have a half dairy Devon mixed in with a beef Devon, I'm probably going to have to wean that first calf early or give her an extra couple of months before I breed her that first time, because she's going to pour more into her calf. Australia just got out of this 18 out of 20 year drought, right? And so what the cattlemen over there are telling me is all the moderate to heavy milking genetics are gone. Right. They couldn't breed back. They couldn't make it. So, now the dilemma is, well, we want to put some milk back in, but we don't want to put too much milk back in, because if we get another drought, right? And so, managing the cattle for the environment, certainly something you've talked about with others, and that's huge. But again, I think where this breed works so well in different environments, but you've got to select from within the breed for that. And if I was to stand to a dairy Devon next to a beef Devon, certainly I'm going to see a more dairy type animal. I'm going to see the hip bones and the chine bone more prominently in the dairy Devon. Dairy Devon seem to have a slicker hair coat. I think they have a little bit of a longevity benefit. They tend to last a little bit longer. I think they have a little bit higher disease and parasite resistance. I think they're more true to that original, shape and form. The beef Devons, I think, are you can't say docility because they're all so quiet, but obviously polled animals are easier on each other than horned animals. And we've got herds of both, and I don't ever fear for anything with the horns, but what they do to each other. And, but I think those are the main things. Is, of course, with a beef Devon, you're going to get more beef. I don't even think you necessarily get better beef. I think you get really high quality beef from both. Just like I think the benefit of the high quality milk plays a role in the beef end of things. It's ironic. I've done 100 different YouTube videos on our channel, and you try to be educational and teach, and you get 12 views. Well, I have one of two pigs nursing off a Devon cow, and I'm talking about the best pork in the world comes from Devon milk, and that's the one that gets 20,000 views, right?
Yeah.
The joke stuff, but again, it plays into that docility and the rich butter fat in the Devon milk. Devonshire cream, right, was the premier cream product in the world. Maybe it still is, but goes back to that high butter fat milk that the Devons produce.
Let's take a quick break and hear a word from our sponsor today, Farming Without the Bank. None of you are farming like you did 100 years ago. Why are you financing it like you did 100 years ago? The biggest part of your operation is the money that runs through your hands, and you let someone else control that. The bank gets the final say in what you get money for and when you pay it back. For many, this is a great relationship, until it's not. Farming Without the Bank shows you how you can take back control of your money so that you can make the bank plan B instead of plan A. This is done by you creating your own banking system you own and control. To learn more, tune into the Farming Without the Bank podcast and go to farmingwithoutthebank.com to get the book. Once you've read the book, Mary Jo will meet with you one-on-one and help you determine where and how to get started. She'll most likely also touch base on some estate transition ideas, financing ideas, business growth or startup ideas, and many other things she has experience with from helping thousands of farmers and ranchers like you. So go to farmingwithoutthebank.com to get the book today and subscribe to the Farming Without the Bank podcast. All of this has been stuff that I've learned in the last 3 or 4 years. But, like that butter fat is connected to marbling and, and some of those things, right? So that those are all connected pieces. And so now when you start to go towards a milking Devon, I'm sure that it's not just butter fat, that you're looking to increase, but probably more than that, you're looking to increase actual amount of milk produced. And so you don't lose the butter fat with the, I'm just guessing here, you don't lose the butter fat in the beef Devons, you just aren't producing as much milk. And so you still maintain that high quality marbled meat, but with a milk production that is going to allow them to survive out on pasture on their own, right? Without having to have huge amounts of supplementation.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I say, we'll put some dairy Devon genetics into a beef Devon, but if you call me and you're looking for heifers and you're going to do strict rotational grazing on improved forages up in Pennsylvania, bam, these are the ones for you. But if you're down in southern Georgia, and you're grazing coastal grasses on sandy plains and the cattle got to travel a little bit, this is not the genetics for you. I would say the right cow for me is moderate milk. And most people go, no, more milk is better. Well, not necessarily.
Right.
I want a certain level of milk, and then managing milk is huge, because heavy milking cows, the other problem you have is, what if that calf doesn't get on all four quarters right away, right? If I'm milking cows, I'm going to be cleaning them out. But if I'm out on the range, more milk becomes a problem. So you can dry lot them and then you can turn them out later. But I'm into low input management. And if I've got to be babysitting you and your calf, and that's a regular routine, that's something I'm not interested in, because I've seen too many cattle that work that don't need that level of babysit.
Yep. And they become generational, right? They're creating the next generation that's going to also need help. And then pretty soon, like we talked about before, pretty soon cows aren't working for me, I'm working for them. And so that becomes a problem, at least in my mind.
No, absolutely. And I've done a fair amount of consultation work over the years. And when Devons were bringing a really high price, 15 years ago, people won't let go of that cow because they spent 10 grand on her. And, now not only are you working for them, but you're indebted to them for some reason to, give them one more try and give them one more try. And as you say, what are you creating then? Now you're keeping infertility as well as management problems.
Yeah. Yep, for sure. So you mentioned a couple of times here the World Devon Congress Tour. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so the World Devon Congress is kind of a neat deal. In 1980, breeders from the 5 major Devon producing countries, which is Great Britain, of course, Australia, New Zealand, the US, and Brazil, got together in the UK and did the national show and toured and visited the prominent farms. 4 years later, they did the US and rotated through those 5 countries. So you do the math, every 4 years, 5 countries, every 20 years, since 84, they've been here. So 2004, when I was a boy, I can still remember, I didn't care as much about the cattle at that point, but had a great time with the international guests and touring and visiting. And I've been blessed to go to those countries on the tour. We had foreign exchange students from Brazil stay in our house. My sister went overseas when she was in college, and just have formed these lifelong friendships doing this tour. And kind of the coolest thing is you go view these cattle with expert cattlemen from around the world that aren't selling anything, right? If you're from Australia and we're looking at a ranch in Pennsylvania, you don't have a dog in the fight. So you get the real honest feedback, but also, they're in a totally different environment. And so are they looking for bigger, smaller, longer, heavier milk and less milk? And so just kind of, complete your education, if you will. As I said before, I do consultation work. First time I went out to Bill, Wyoming to do a consultation for a gentleman, I said, I can't take your money. I don't know how your cows are alive. There's nothing here to eat. I am so far out of my element. I'll judge your cattle for nothing, but you gotta forgive me. And I learned real quick, you better learn, where you're going and about the environment, because that plays a huge role. And so anyway, 2024 is around. It's our turn. It coincides with 400 years of Devons in this country. I know everybody has their breed loyalty, but I've tried to sell this as the birth of the U.S. beef and dairy industries, because this were the first breeds, the first breed that played a role not only in westward expansion, as we talked about, but in these industries, and wasn't a a feral breed, was a true breed with recorded pedigrees and guaranteed purity as much as you can do that, and the history that goes with it. And the Livestock Conservancy has been great as well, helping us. We were the first breed that they started with in this country. And of course, they've gone on to help so many different heritage breeds. And, there's heritage breeds that you scratch your head and go, why are we preserving that? And we're doing it because we don't know why, but either we love it or we're afraid we might lose something. And again, let's not try to outsmart God. If it was put here, there's probably some bigger purpose than we realize. And, but with the Devons, they've played a real role and continue to play a real role as grass farming continues to grow and expand. Devons have played a role and continue to play a key role in that. And so that's the World Devon Congress. The final stop of the World Devon Congress is going to be May 1st and May 2nd in Plymouth, Massachusetts. They have what's called the Plymouth Patuxent Museum, which is a living history museum. They've rebuilt a village to the period, and we're actually going to bring Devon. My hope had been to bring a ship in and push a couple overboard and swim them ashore, but my eyes were bigger than my stomach, as Grandma used to say, and that's not going to happen. But we're going to walk them from the shoreline up through the village. We're going to have international breeders, domestic breeders, dairy Devon breeders, oxen people there, and just anybody who's curious about the history and of the beef and the dairy industries and this wonderful breed. They have what's called the Mayflower 2 there, so you can actually, step on board of a replica ship that's made to and experience what it was like. And as you say, they carved this out of rock, right? And how brave you must have been.
Oh my goodness.
Right. I'm a veteran, and veterans get lots of support and well deserved, and I love it. But I go, man, I had the whole U.S. government and military behind me. We had night vision and state of the art, this and that. These guys got on a whole wooden ship and came to America and had no idea what they were in for. And they brought the Devon cattle with them for a reason.
Yeah, no doubt. How bad do you have to hate tyranny to get on a ship and know that you're going to land somewhere in the winter?
Well, and that's the reality, right? It was probably a lot fear-based. Can't get any worse than this. And that's a shame. But how much do you have to trust God, right? I mean, absolutely. Amen.
So
Amen.
all that rolled into one. Fearlessness, faith, disdain for tyrannical governments, all of that was rolled into that whole thing. But yeah, no, I really appreciate that. And I think that you're maybe burying the lead here a little bit, because the tour starts in April, right? The end of April in Orlando, and works its way up the kind of the East Coast and into Ohio. I see some stops there. So, I mean, it's an amazing opportunity. And do you have a feeling for kind of the participation level on the tour itself?
Yeah, numbers are still rolling in. If you go to reddevonusa.com is the association website, and there's links on social media and with other places as well. But Red Devon USA is of course the one that pops into my head. There's not only a registration link, but you can see the websites of every place we're stopping. And yes, we're visiting 10 different Devon destinations. We're going to see different types of production system. We're going to show and celebrate the diversity of this breed. We're going to see them working in the deep south. We're going to see them working in the far north. We're going to see beef Devons. We're going to see dairy Devons. We're going to see some oxen. We're even going to stop in Georgia and visit Dan Glenn and see no Devons, but a unique production system with his irrigated pastures. And we want to talk about along the way the different challenges that you face in this region to beef production, and whether that's environmental predators, forages. Here where we are, we're in the middle of fescue country, and fescue's a blessing and fescue's a curse, and and how do you deal with that? And so it's going to be a great tour. We've tried to set it up to be educational, so you're not just visiting Devon operations, but you're seeing sustainable operations that are using products off the land. We're going to stay at the Biltmore in North Carolina. Everything in their restaurant comes from their local production, so we've tried to model the whole tour. We've got great speakers along the way, and I can go on and on. I hate to say too much because I'm going to forget somebody or some stop, but very proud of the program that we've put together. And there's also the opportunity for people you don't have to take the whole tour. You can come to this stop and that stop, and you can come just to Plymouth Plantation for the final celebration. But all the contact information and details are linked there on the website. So please check it out.
And is there a possibility for people to participate in one day without taking part in the whole thing, or is it just the Plymouth? I see that there's an option to register just for the Plymouth stop at the end. Is there an opportunity to drop in and say on the Biltmore day or on another day? Is that an option?
Absolutely. And it's like a per day cost, and it varies basically, on where we're going or what we're doing. And when you visit one farm, there might be 3 or 4 other producers that have brought cattle to that farm and other things going on those farms. But absolutely, you can participate in one day or multiple days. We're excited. There's a film company called Backyard Green Films that have done a fair amount of work there. We're trying to raise money to get them on the entire tour with us, but they're going to be at Plymouth. They've been filming a Devon documentary, Plymouth to Plymouth, and it's going to culminate with this 400-year celebration or some of the footage of that. And of course, your podcast. We're just excited about all the way the word is getting out, and the response has been great. So I hate to speculate. I think it's going to vary along the way, but I think we're going to have hundreds of people up at Plymouth, and looking forward to I'm glad I have my room reserved.
Well, and just an amazing opportunity with, like you said, 5 countries coming together. It sounds to me, and maybe I'm overselling it, but it sounds to me like a once in a lifetime opportunity as far as just all the history culminating on this year. And then, the tour that you've got scheduled, and just an amazing opportunity to see different operations in different states. And see, that's always a great opportunity to learn and get outside your comfort zone, like somebody from Virginia coming to Wyoming and saying, you're starving these cattle. Obviously you're not, they're all in good shape, but it looks like they should be. It just, right. Anytime you can get that, you get your head dumped out and new stuff put in it, it's a good opportunity. And this is kind of that opportunity par excellence, I think. So I think that it's really an awesome opportunity. And I will have links in the show notes page for today, workingcows.net/343. Workingcows.net/343 is the show notes page for today. You can go there, find links to the Devon tour, the World Devon Congress tour, and go and sign up. And it looks like, an amazing vacation opportunity to take the family along. I'm thinking as a homeschool dad, what would be better than taking your kids to Plymouth and getting them exposed to all of this history all at one time. And so, yeah, it sounds like a great opportunity. So, really, really, think it's something that people should consider, and would love to see some people from the podcast be a part of it. So really good stuff. I'd like to just circle back around as we kind of point towards wrapping up here to the Devon breed again, and kind of finish where we started, but more talk about the actual cattle themselves, some of the distinctives of the cattle themselves, the size, the efficiency, and some of those things. And we had a conversation earlier, kind of about some of the history, and you were talking about Gerald Fry and his involvement. And I don't think anybody that listens to the Working Cows podcast is going to throw rocks at you when you talk about Gerald Fry. I think they will be more along the line of people who might write checks to you for talking about Gerald Fry. So go ahead and I think mention his name without reservation, but talk about kind of just the breed itself and some of those distinctives.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we have lots of visitors a week that come to the farm, and I always sell the breed as the world's most practical breed. They're just easy. They easy breeding. They're easy keeping. I shared with you, we won the national show last year with a 28-year-old cow with a calf at side, and she actually bred back while we were at the show. And we didn't know that for months and months later, but DNA confirmed. And Gerald Fry is one of many. My predecessor was a Dr. Stuart Fowler, who ran ag programs at several prominent universities back in the 60s and 70s, and was working as a packer buyer, and saw these great carcasses coming across the floor and traced them back to a Devon farm and fell in love with the breed. One of our premier breeders and board members right now is a fourth generation butcher in Pennsylvania, Anthony O'Neill, who found the breed based on carcasses. Gerald Fry was a breed consultant, right? And it's breed consultant suicide to marry yourself to one breed, right? And that's what Gerald did with the Devons at one point, and bought all in. And you were joking earlier, and Gerald has his fans and his enemies, and as all successful cattlemen, prominent cattlemen do. But he knew good cattle and recognized the qualities of the breed. And I can remember showing him Devon cattle early on, and just his reaction to the ultrasound scores and the linear measurements that he was getting off these cattle, and how quickly he was picking out his favorites and seeing how much they cost and which ones he was taking home with him. And it continues to that today. I've never met anybody that bought Devon cattle and then got rid of them because they didn't work. Mm-hmm. I've seen people get out because they got too old, because they were moving, because they were changing directions. But the Devon cattle work. They're why did they bring them on the ship? Obviously, they needed adaptability. They were looking for the meat and the milk and the plow, but that longevity, that easy breeding, easy keeping. When you wean we keep calves on the cow 10 and a half months. And give the cows barely 30 days to recover before they calve again. One of the big problems we have with Devon cows is they'll let multiple calves nurse.
Mm-hmm.
So you have one calf starving because mom was feeding the entire herd. I have cows that won't come in the barn for shots. I got to take shot out to them because they stop at the door and they say, no, we've had enough. It's a different set of problems that you run into. The most dangerous animals out there are the crazy ones. The second most dangerous are the tame ones. You've got to be very careful about making your Devons too quiet. My father donated Devons to Berry College, Georgia, back in the 80s, and they were doing flush work, and they ruined the cattle. They got them too fat in a short period, and of course, obesity in cattle is arguably worse than starving.
Right.
Get fat deposits that ruin them over time. So you run into a different set of problems. A lot of bulls, as they get older, get mean. Devon bulls don't get mean, but they learn that fencing is not going to hold them, and so they just walk through gates and boards, and you can only contain them with electricity, and it's all manageable.
I think that's just bulls in general. I don't know that Devon are unique in that
way. But yeah, they have a propensity for grass. When you wean these calves, the cows come back into flesh incredibly quick. We ran the Lakota bull test here for 20 years, of forage-based bull test with no supplementation. Alan Williams got me going, 20 years ago with this, and we brought in bulls of all different breeds. And the test died because the Devons outperformed the other breeds. And, arguably, a lot of the bulls were mine and they were staying in the same environment, but bulls were here for 15, 16 months on grass. It's a lot of time to work out variables. And again, there's animals in all breeds that work, and I've got respect for and can see the quality and in all types of cattle.
Yeah, I think it goes to something you said earlier that as Steve Campbell calls it, when the space race started, when we started going bigger, better, faster type of animals, and when I say better, I mean better marbling, better all these things. Not necessarily better cow as the cow is. You talk about a baseball player being a 5-tool player. They've got to do everything, all 5 of the aspects. I'm sure we could list out what those aspects for a cow are, and when you go bigger, better, faster, for the industry, you end up sacrificing one or more of those things that a cow has to do well to survive on her own. So you mentioned this group of people who left the breed as it was when that space race started. Was that out of a conviction about, no, we need to keep this breed as it is, or this breed functions well, why would we mess with it? Do you know any of that, or
I think it was definitely a lot of that. I think there was also some, hey, daddy had these Devons and I grew up with these Devons, so we're going to keep Devons. We can afford to, and they work for us. And so, but I think a lot of it was, and I think even today, Devons around the world are bred for different things, and not everybody wants to keep them as close to as they were. And a lot of people get all fired up about it, but that's farming, right? You get to play creator a little bit on your acreage and roll the dice and see what you can come up with. And, but I go back to what you said earlier. You can't change this without messing with that. And last year we got Forage Producer of the Year for the state of Virginia. We got Conservationist of the Year for our county. Well, we didn't try to do any of that, right? I got Smithsonian put a picture of us because we've helped with upland bird population. I've got nothing against upland birds, but I never tried to save the upland birds. I just tried to farm in accordance with nature and listen to the animals and pay attention. And because of that, the upland birds are thriving. Beavers are back. We got, dung beetles and all these other things that others are recognizing as well. But I'm lying if I said I set out to do those things. But Alan Williams, I referred to earlier, he always talks about compounding and cascading effects, right? And when you do something positive, right, and I think that's very accurate. And so, boy, if I want to add a bunch of size or take it away or something else, there are going to be effects. And the quicker you try to make that change, the more drastic the side effects, I think, are going to be. So, again, I was lucky. When I took over for Dr. Fowler, who ran our program, I kind of got a playbook of this is how you breed everybody. And I followed it to the T as long as I could, observing and paying attention. And of course, now with semen and embryos, you can even go back into the tank. And if you do get somewhere you don't like, you can go backwards. But I think it's wise to proceed cautiously, right? And we're lucky. I can breed bulls to crossbred cows, see how they perform before I use them in the purebred herd, etc. But it's amazing how quick you can make change. But I think that's why these animals that have stayed true to form are so valuable. Because if you breed away from that for 10 generations, you can't get back there in 2, it takes time to get back. And I think there's value, again, in all breeds, but especially in these heritage breeds. And as you can tell, I'm a big nerd when it comes to the history behind this breed. But even without that history, it's a very, very special breed of cattle, and it fits a lot of different environments and production systems.
Yeah, and that is a great segue into my last question. And why isn't everyone running Devons?
Well, that's my question too, and honestly, I feel bad because I feel like I give people good advice and good guidance, and I think I thought this breed was going to take over 10 years ago. I don't know why I can pull you out PowerPoint presentations, articles I wrote 10, 15 years ago saying feed, fuel, fertilizer, the prices are all going up. The math doesn't work. You got to go to low input farming. We look at global cereal grain production has leveled off for the last 10 years, right? But we add 1 billion people every decade. Protein consumption has tripled. The human health epidemic is disgusting. And we need animals that can convert something we have an unlimited supply of, like cellulose or grass, into usable human energy, glucose, and ruminants are the answer. And the Devons are obviously one breed of cattle, of ruminant, but they make a gourmet quality product on average grasses, right? And don't get me wrong, I finished steers in 2 years or less, and I am using improved forages, and I am moving regularly, and I am doing things to really push them. But that 28-year-old cow that I told you about, she hadn't seen an improved forage in her life, right? She'd never seen grain. We need a breed of cattle that can work on moderate rangeland and produce and sustain and rebreed. And there are other animals that check that box, but the Devons at a high success rate check that off, and at the same time don't want to run you over, don't want to run away from you, and give you that gourmet experience.
Well, and the economics of agriculture being what it is right now, in large part due to the fact that the government has its hand on the scales in a big way, means that livestock, specifically cattle production, is going to be done on what's left over after the grain farmers are done using the ground, right? Either we're going to use it in their dormant season, or we're going to have to use ground that they can't use. And that ground is going to be, by and large, ground that produces grass that isn't, isn't the most powerful thing out there, and so we're going to have to use that ground to grow cattle, and that just happens to be the ground that they thrive on. And so we're going to have to find cattle that can do that well, and those are the low input cattle, and that's, kind of sounds like what the Devon breed is. Do they do well? I mean, the tour is an Eastern based tour, and I'm sure you could have toured all of America, but it would have increased the cost even more and all those things. But do they do well in lots of different environments, including the West and other places?
Yeah, absolutely. We have breeders all over the country that are thriving, and if you go to reddevonusa.com, again, you can get a breeders list, and I can start naming names, but again, I'm going to leave somebody off. But and you mentioned Steve Campbell earlier. Steve certainly is in touch with a lot of breeders out in that region, as well. I say that region, that third of the country, if you will, that are doing very well, and I'm happy to share with people too if they want to reach out. But I was down in Texas, earlier this year with a man who's got a herd there in Texas, and his cousins are in Mexico and have been using Devon successfully in crossbreeding now for a decade, and are starting to get purebred Devon cattle going there, working with groups up in Canada. And Devon numbers up there continue to expand as well. I remember last year I was reaching out to breeders, and I said, I get questions all the time about Devons in the Deep South and in the North. Can you send me a picture? And I think it was end of April, early May, and a lady named Jenny Carl in Montana, right in Yellowstone, right? Everybody knows Yellowstone these days, right? And she's right there. And she sent me a picture, and the cattle are in like 6 feet of snow that had fallen that morning. And she's like, yeah, they handle it pretty well. I always tell this story. I had to go up to the northernmost, the highest elevation up in Maine. This man was getting divorced from his wife, and they were splitting assets. And he said each cow was worth $500, and she said each cow was worth $5,000. And the lawyers agreed that I'd come in and value the cattle, and they'd use that, right? And I got to this place, and there was 30 feet base of snow. This guy told me they had to bury water lines 9 feet deep in the ground. Mm-hmm. Anyway, I'd get in my rental car, and I'd get all bundled up, and I'd go out and I'd look at a cow. About 2 minutes, I'd go back, get in the car, thaw out, write down my notes, get all my gear back on, and go out and do it again. Fortunately, they only had like 15 head of cattle. But the whole time I'm doing this, and this guy was feeding hay, right? So they had this kind of warmer patch on the ground didn't phase these animals in the least. And anyway, I can go on and on. There are bloodlines that work better in the Deep South and in the far North, and that milk better or produce better carcasses, bigger carcasses. And there's myself and others in the breed like Steve that can help you select those genetics. But we have genetics that'll work in every single environment in this country, and that are right now as we speak.
Yeah, very good, very good. Jeremy, I really appreciate your time today. I said the show notes number wrong earlier. I'll say it again here. It's workingcows.net/344 will be the show notes and page for today, and we can have links there to the World Devon Congress Tour. And yeah, it looks like a great opportunity, and I really appreciate your time today. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, and thank you for what you do. And I got to say, I was first introduced to you. We've got a local group, and what we've started doing. It's the guy that set it up was a gentleman named Jacob Gilley that works with American Farmland Trust, but he sends out a podcast every week. And a bunch of us local producers, we all listen to that podcast, and then we have our own roundtable Zoom call and discuss the podcast. And it's really been fantastic to, one, follow up on, continue what you guys have done, right? You guys get people thinking outside the box and talking about these different production systems, et cetera. But then you get to hear how the other farmers, how is it interpreted and perceived and put into place. And so really have enjoyed not only the podcast, but the conversations and things that have ensued after. So thanks for what you're doing, and keep up the good work.
Well, thank you. That sounds like an awesome group. I hope it's not just my podcast, because there's a lot of other great ones out there that you have to discuss.
Well, we have hit a diverse bunch, and you know what? Some you love and some you don't like, right. and sometimes it's the person running it, and sometimes it's the topic. But I find that, again, it's fun to see. Just because I didn't enjoy it didn't mean other people didn't enjoy it. Yep. And so it's fun. It's just like looking at cattle. I love to hear what a master cattleman thinks of that cow, but I also want to know what average Joe thinks of that cow, because you get some of both, when you're selling. So it's neat to see all that perspective.
Yep. After 6 years of doing this, I finally got my first written 1-star review on Apple Podcasts. And it was somebody said, I listened to 30 or 40 episodes and I didn't learn anything. And I'm like, that's fine. I'm sure there are lots of people out there in your shoes, but I thought that was pretty funny. It took that long to finally get a written. I think I'd had other 1-star reviews, but finally got a written 1-star review. So that was.
Well, he liked something if he listened to 30 or 40 episodes.
That's what I thought too.
Sure, you didn't check the wrong box.
That's a long time.
That is
a lot of time invested. But anyways, Jeremy, thanks for your time today.
Thank you as well. Have a great rest of your day.
Very good stuff there with Jeremy. Really appreciate his perspective. And as you can tell, he's a big picture thinker. And that goes to some of what we talked about in the bonus content with him for Patreon supporters. And you can find that at patreon.com/workingcows. And we talked to him about the future of the food system, where we're at now, where he thinks we might be in the coming years. And along with that, I'll be releasing some bonus content at the end of this week to the main podcast feed with Zach Smith. Now, the reason I'm doing that is because I am emceeing the 2024 Soil Health Conference for South Dakota Soil Health Coalition this year in Rapid City, South Dakota. Zach is one of the speakers, and I just wanted to give people an opportunity to come out. And if you're within driving distance, hop in a car and come and join us for this conference. Zach is going to be one of the early speakers in the conference, along with Glenn Elzinga and Cooper Hibbard and other guests that you've heard over the years. Dave Olila will be there as well. And just going to be an awesome conference, I think. I'm really looking forward to it. Lots of practical breakout sessions. In fact, most of the conference is breakout sessions. So lots of opportunities to really get into the details and get your questions answered. And then we'll finish up the conference, or real close to the end of the conference. We'll be recording a live episode of the Working Cows podcast with Glenn Elzinga, Cooper Hibbard, Zach Smith, and Jay Fuhrer. So really excited for that opportunity as well, and would encourage you to come on out and meet us there, and would look forward to having the opportunity to meet you and network with you and your family. So pretty cool opportunity. Check out the show notes page for today, workingcows.net/344 for more info. After that bonus episode at the end of this week, coming up next week on the Working Cows podcast, we will be talking to one of the members of the Understanding Ag team for some of the first content that we're producing together for 2024. So pretty excited about that, and look for that coming your way real soon on another episode of the Working Cows podcast.
We invite you to visit workingcows.net to subscribe to the show via iTunes or Stitcher. You'll also find detailed show notes pages, resources from our guests, and the industry leaders who have influenced them. For more ideas on putting your cows to work for you in a more profitable way, tune in next week.